In April 2025, Atiku Abubakar, Peter Obi, and a list of Nigeria's most powerful political names walked into a hall in Abuja and shook hands. They announced a coalition, one platform, one mission: defeat Tinubu in 2027. By May 2026, just over a year later, Peter Obi had quit it. Kwankwaso had quit it. The presidency's own spokesperson called Obi a politician made of jelly on live social media. And 4 days ago, June 26, 2026, a federal high court reversed itself and stripped Obi's new party of its registration, sending the whole thing back to square one. Here are the numbers nobody in this opposition seems to want to look at directly. In 2023, Atiku, Obi, and Kwankwaso combined for over 15 million votes. Tinubu got 8.7 million. On paper, the anti-Tinubu majority is not close, it is enormous. So why, with 18 months until Nigerians vote again, is the opposition still fighting itself instead of fighting Tinubu? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why this keeps happening and whether there is still a realistic path for the opposition to actually win in January 2027. If you are new to Pulse Nigeria HQ, this channel exists to give Nigerians the political analysis mainstream media will not touch. Subscribe now and stay with me because this story is moving fast and changing by the week. From handshake to lawsuit, the full timeline. To understand where Nigeria's opposition stands today, you need the complete timeline, because this story has moved through more reversals in 14 months than most political coalitions see in a decade. In July 2025, after nearly 2 years of quiet negotiation, Atiku Abubakar, Peter Obi, former Senate President David Mark, former Kaduna Governor Nasir El-Rufai, and a long list of opposition figures officially adopted the African Democratic Congress as their unified platform to challenge Tinubu in 2027. Obi and El-Rufai, men from opposite ends of Nigeria's political and religious spectrum, held hands on stage. Mark became interim national chairman, Aregbesola interim secretary. The coalition's stated goal was explicit: agree on a single presidential candidate and deny Tinubu the divided opposition that handed him victory in 2023. On April 25, 2026, the coalition reached what looked like its defining moment: an agreement to back a single presidential candidate. For a brief window, Nigeria's opposition appeared to have solved the problem that broke it in 2023. That window closed fast. In early May 2026, Peter Obi and Kwankwaso, the men who placed third and fourth in the 2023 election, both quit the ADC coalition. In a statement to Reuters, Obi said he was leaving over endless court cases, internal battles, suspicion, and division. Presidency spokesperson Bayo Onanuga responded on X with language that has since defined the public mood around this story. He called Obi a politician made of jelly, an opportunistic fellow who pursues the easy road that will only lead him to doom like in 2023. Obi and Kwankwaso then moved toward a different vehicle, the NDC, the Nigerian Democratic Congress, a newly registered party. For a few weeks, the NDC looked like Obi's clean break from the ADC's internal warfare. It was not. On June 26, 2026, 4 days before this recording, a federal high court in Lokoja set aside its own earlier judgment that had directed INEC to register the NDC. Justice Issa Dashen ruled that the original December 2025 registration order was reached without properly hearing all affected parties, specifically the Peace Movement Party, which claims ownership of the logo the NDC adopted. The case now returns to court for a fresh hearing with all parties joined. Obi's camp has vowed to appeal, but as of today, the legal basis for the NDC's existence as a registered party is, in the court's own words, suspended. Meanwhile, Atiku's media aide Paul Ibe responded to the Lokoja ruling with a public call for Obi and Kwankwaso to immediately harmonize their political strength with the ADC. That is the closest thing to an olive branch either side has extended in weeks, and it came wrapped in a clear subtext: come back to us because your new party may not survive its own court case. And there is a third thread most Nigerians have not connected to this story at all. The PDP, Nigeria's once dominant party, is not reunifying. It is fracturing along a different line entirely. As of this week, a Wike-aligned PDP faction led by Abdul Rahman Mohammed and Samuel Anyanwu has filed a police petition against a rival camp, accusing them of submitting forged documents to INEC. Multiple competing claims to PDP leadership, one tied to Umar Damagum, another to the Wike-backed bloc, are simultaneously active. The party that governed Nigeria for 16 years cannot currently agree on who is allowed to speak for it. If the arithmetic so clearly favors a united opposition, why does every attempt to unity collapse within months? And is this pattern accidental or structural? With the NDC's registration now suspended by court order, does Peter Obi even have a legally viable party to run on in January 2027? And what happens if he doesn't? The legal architecture standing between the opposition and the ballot. Let us be precise about what the courts have actually decided, because the legal status of Nigeria's opposition parties right now is more fragile than most political commentary acknowledges. INEC's portal for parties to upload their presidential candidates for 2027 opened on June 26 and closes July 11, 11 days from this recording. Every legal dispute over party registration is racing against that single immovable date. On the NDC, the Lokoja Court's June 26 reversal did not declare the NDC illegitimate. It declared that the December 2025 ruling, which recognized it, was procedurally defective because the Peace Movement Party, which claims it owns the logo the NDC uses, was never properly joined as a party to the case. The court has ordered the matter restarted from scratch with all relevant parties present. That is a process that, under normal Nigerian judicial timelines, could easily extend past the July 11 INEC deadline. If it does, Obi's camp faces a genuine structural problem. Appealing a procedural reversal does not guarantee a ruling before the candidate submission window closes. Here is the detail almost no Nigerian commentary on this story has connected. The Peace Movement Party's competing claim over the NDC logo is not a random technicality. A party's logo and name are central to ballot recognition. Nigerian voters, particularly in rural areas with lower literacy rates, frequently identify their preferred party by its symbol on the ballot paper rather than reading the party name in full. A dispute over the logo is not cosmetic. It goes to the heart of whether voters can correctly identify and vote for the NDC even if it survives the legal challenge. This is precisely the kind of procedural vulnerability that a well-resourced hostile legal challenge can exploit, regardless of who actually filed it or why. On the ADC, unlike the NDC, the African Democratic Congress is a long-established and registered party. It has existed since well before the 2025 coalition. Its registration is not in legal dispute. What is contested is internal, factional infighting between the coalition's new entrants and the party's 2023-era leadership, including former presidential candidate Dumebi Kachiku, who has publicly accused Atiku, Obi and others of hijacking the party. On the PDP, the situation is the most legally tangled of all three. There is a subsisting Federal High Court judgment from October 2024 recognizing Umar Damagum as acting national chairman. There is a Court of Appeal ruling from March 2026 affirming the suspension of National Secretary Samuel Anyanwan, and there is simultaneously a Wike-backed faction operating with its own parallel leadership structure, holding its own conventions, and now petitioning the police over an allegedly forged letter sent to INEC by a rival faction. Multiple valid-looking court orders point in different directions. INEC itself has to decide practically whose signature it will accept on official candidate submissions, and that decision alone could determine which version of the PDP exists on the 2027 ballot. Why unity keeps collapsing and who actually benefits? Let us move past the legal mechanics and examine the political chessboard, because the pattern in this story is not random, it is structural, and understanding why requires looking honestly at what each major figure actually wants. Atiku Abubakar, at age 78, is reportedly preparing his 7th run for the Nigerian presidency. According to reporting on the coalition's internal negotiations, Atiku offered to contest as the coalition's presidential candidate for a single term, then hand over to Obi in 2031. Obi's camp has consistently rejected this. Their argument is straightforward. There is a strong sentiment across southern Nigeria that following Tinubu's presidency, the office should remain with a southern candidate, and Obi's supporters believe he is the only opposition figure capable of mobilizing the youth turnout that defines modern Nigerian elections. Here is the structural reality that explains why this keeps happening regardless of who is involved. Every major figure in this coalition built their political career on being the principal, not the second name on a ticket. Atiku has run for president multiple times since 1993. Obi was a sitting governor who left his party and ran his own historic youth-driven campaign in 2023. Kwankwaso has run Kano state politics independently for 2 decades. El-Rufai governed Kaduna with a famously unilateral style. A coalition built from 5 or 6 men who have each spent their careers being the final decision-maker in their own political universe is not a natural alliance. It is a temporary truce between rival sovereigns, and truces between rival sovereigns hold only as long as the external threat feels more dangerous than the internal rivalry. The moment internal positioning for 2027 began in earnest, ticket negotiations, logo disputes, court filings, the external threat of Tinubu stopped being the dominant pressure in the room. Now, consider who structurally benefits from this fragmentation, independent of motive or intent. President Tinubu does not need to do anything to weaken the opposition right now. The opposition is weakening itself. Every news cycle dominated by an ADC versus NDC story, a PDP factional clash, or a Peter Obi lawsuit against a former ally is a news cycle the presidency does not have to spend resources fighting. The presidency's own spokesperson recognized this dynamic explicitly when he mocked Obi's departure from the coalition in public. That is not a man worried about a unified opposition. That is a man enjoying a divided one. On the new Obi Okonko lawsuit specifically, which broke into the news cycle this week, Obi is seeking 8 billion naira in damages from his former ally Kenneth Okonko over comments Okonko made on Channels Television in early June. Whatever the legal merits, the political effect is unmistakable. It is opposition figures suing each other in the same news cycle where they are supposed to be building unity against a common opponent. Every Nigerian following this story sees the contradiction immediately. On Wike's role, the FCT minister continues to be the single most consequential figure shaping the PDP's internal direction, backing the Mohammed Enyawu faction against the Damagum bloc. Wike has been explicit and public about his alignment with Tinubu's re-election. A PDP under Wike's effective influence is a PDP unlikely to seriously challenge Tinubu in 2027, which means the party that once had the strongest grassroots structure in Nigeria is, for practical purposes, neutralized as an opposition threat regardless of how its internal court battles resolve. Now, if what I just told you surprises you, drop a comment below right now. Tell me honestly, do you think the opposition can still come together before January 2027? I want to know what you think before we get to the section that changes the entire calculation.
What this means for Nigeria beyond who wins. Let us step back from individual political ambitions and examine what this fragmentation means for Nigeria as a country, regardless of who eventually occupies Aso Rock in 2027. On democratic competition itself, a healthy democracy requires a credible opposition capable of holding the ruling party accountable, win or lose. Right now, Nigeria's three largest opposition formations, the ADC, the NBC, and the PDP, are each consumed by internal legal warfare rather than building policy platforms or holding the Tinubu administration accountable on inflation, insecurity, or governance failures. The absence of a functioning opposition voice does not strengthen Nigerian democracy even if Tinubu's policies are genuinely working. Accountability requires friction, and friction requires organized opposition. On voter disillusionment, the 2023 election already saw a turnout of just 26.72% of registered voters, among the lowest in Nigeria's democratic history. Nigerians who were energized by Obi's 2023 campaign, who registered to vote for the first time, who believed change was possible, are now watching their preferred coalition dissolve into court filings and social media insults. Political disillusionment among young first-time voters is corrosive to long-term democratic participation. If the opposition cannot demonstrate basic organizational discipline, it risks losing not just the 2027 election, but an engagement of an entire generation of voters who came close to political participation in 2023 and may simply disengage if 2027 looks like more of the same chaos. On economy and governance focus, every week spent on coalition infighting is a week not spent scrutinizing Tinubu's economic record. Food inflation, the value of the naira, fuel subsidy removal's lingering effects, and the real living conditions of ordinary Nigerians. An opposition distracted by internal warfare cannot perform its most basic democratic function, pressuring the government to perform better regardless of the next election's outcome. On regional balance, the fragmentation specifically damages the prospects of a southern presidential candidacy succeeding Tinubu. If Obi's NDC vehicle becomes legally unviable and if Atiku's ADC retains northern dominance within the coalition, the structural case for power remaining in southern hands after Tinubu's tenure weakens considerably, a dynamic with implications for Nigeria's delicate zoning conventions that have underpinned political stability since 1999.
What the diaspora and international observers are watching. For Nigerians in the UK, the US, Canada, and across the diaspora, the health of Nigeria's opposition matters directly to how the country is perceived internationally and to the kind of governance your families back home will experience. International investors and development partners use the credibility of a country's opposition as one signal of democratic maturity. A fragmented, court-battling opposition signals weaker institutional checks on executive power, a factor that affects how the IMF, World Bank, and bilateral partners assess governance risk in Nigeria. This is not abstract. Governance risk assessments directly influence investment decisions, loan conditions, and the cost of Nigeria's international borrowing. For Nigerians specifically, the 2023 election saw historic levels of diaspora engagement with the obedient movement, social media mobilization, remittance-funded campaign support, and diaspora voter advocacy, even though Nigeria currently does not permit diaspora voting in federal elections. That energy was built on the premise that organized youth-driven opposition could meaningfully challenge entrenched political structures. The current fragmentation tests whether that diaspora energy can be sustained through a second cycle or whether it dissipates into the same cynicism that has characterized previous Nigerian election cycles.
On ECOWAS and regional democratic norms, Nigeria, as the largest democracy in the region, is often held up as a benchmark for West African democratic governance. A 2027 election contested with unresolved party registration disputes, competing factional claims, and minimal opposition coordination would not strengthen Nigeria's standing as a regional democratic model at a moment when several West African nations have experienced military takeovers and democratic backsliding.
The strongest case that unity can still happen. Let us engage the strongest argument that this story is not over, because writing off opposition unity entirely would be premature, and the strongest defenders of that position make real points. The case goes like this. Nigerian political coalitions have collapsed and reformed before, often closer to election day than commentators expect. 18 months remains before the January 2027 vote, a meaningful window in Nigerian political timescales where alliances have historically been negotiated, broken, and rebuilt within shorter periods. Paul Ibe's public call for Obi and Kwankwaso to rejoin the ADC, issued within days of the NDC's legal setback, shows that lines of communication between the factions remain open rather than permanently severed. This is posturing and pressure, not necessarily a closed door. Furthermore, the underlying electoral arithmetic that made the coalition attractive in the first place has not changed. Atiku, Obi, and Kwankwaso's combined 2023 vote total still exceeds Tinubu's by a wide margin. That mathematical reality does not disappear because of a court ruling on a party logo. If the NDC's registration challenge is resolved in Obi's favor on appeal, which is plausible since the original December 2025 ruling was reversed on procedural grounds, not on the substance of the NDC's claim to the disputed logo, Obi's platform could be restored well before July 11th. Here is the counterintuitive argument that most coverage of this story is missing entirely. The legal chaos around the NDC and the factional warfare inside the PDP may actually be pushing Obi and Atiku's camps closer together, not further apart, for a reason that has nothing to do with sentiment. If the NDC's registration remains legally unresolved past July 11th, and if the PDP remains practically erasable as a vehicle due to its own factional warfare, Obi's only legally certain path onto the 2027 ballot becomes the ADC, the very platform he left in May. Necessity, not reconciliation, may be the force that eventually drives a reunion. Political coalitions in Nigeria have historically been driven less by genuine ideological alignment than by practical mathematics of who has a viable ballot line when nomination deadlines arrive. If that pattern holds here, watch for movement back toward the ADC, not because Obi and Atiku resolve their personal rivalry, but because the courts may not leave Obi any other legally clean option before the clock runs out. The most widespread misconception in Nigerian social media commentary on this story is treating it as a simple binary. Either the opposition unites and wins, or it stays fragmented and Tinubu cruises to victory. The more accurate picture is that Nigeria's modified two-round electoral system means even a three-way opposition split could force a runoff if no candidate crosses 50% of the 25% in 24 states threshold. A first-round opposition split, followed by a second-round consolidation around whichever opposition candidate survives, is a structurally different and more plausible scenario than either a clean coalition victory or an easy Tinubu landslide. What happens next? The 5 signals that matter most. Let us resolve the loops we opened and lay out exactly what to watch. Why unity keeps collapsing? The honest answer is structural, not accidental. Every major figure in this opposition built a political career on being the final decision-maker, not a deputy. A coalition of rival sovereigns holds as long as the shared external threat outweighs internal ambition. And the moment ticket negotiations, party logos, and 2027 positioning became concrete rather than abstract, internal ambition reasserted itself. This is not a one-time failure of personal chemistry between Atiku and Obi. It is the predictable outcome of combining several politicians who each have spent decades as principals rather than partners.
Expect this pattern to recur in some form before January 2027 unless one figure decisively steps back, which neither has shown willingness to do so far. Does Obi have a legally viable party? As of this recording, the honest answer is not with certainty. The NNDC's registration is suspended pending a fresh Federal High Court hearing with all parties properly joined, and that process is racing against the July 11 INEC candidate submission deadline. Obi's camp has vowed to appeal, and an appeal could plausibly succeed given that the original ruling was reversed on procedural grounds rather than on the substance of the NNDC's claim. But plausible appeal success is not the same as certain ballot access in 11 days. If the legal process does not resolve in Obi's favor before July 11, his most legally certain path back onto the presidential ballot runs directly through the ADC, the coalition he left in May. That is the practical pressure point driving Paul Ibe's public call for reunification, and it is worth watching closely in the days ahead. Here is what to watch in the next 30 to 60 days. The NNDC's legal outcome and whether it resolves before the July 11 INEC deadline. This is the single most time-sensitive legal thread in the entire opposition story. Whether Obi makes any public move back toward the ADC, watch his public statements, his social media activity, and any reported meetings with Atiku's camp in the coming weeks, particularly if the NNDC appeal stalls. How INEC handles the competing PDP leadership claims when the candidate submission window closes. Whichever faction's signature INEC accepts effectively determines which version of the PDP exists for 2027, a decision with major implications regardless of the party's national standing. Whether the ADC's internal tension with its 2023-era leadership, including Dumebi Kachiku's hijacking allegations, escalates into its own legal challenge. A second major party facing a registration dispute in the same election cycle would compound the opposition's structural problems significantly. Best case for the opposition. The NNDC's legal status is resolved swiftly. Obi and Atiku find a structural compromise on the presidential ticket before October 2026, and a single, legally unambiguous opposition candidate enters January 2027 backed by the combined 15 million vote coalition that exists on paper. In that scenario, Tinubu faces his most serious electoral challenge since 1999. Most likely scenario based on current evidence. The legal disputes drag close to or past the July 11 deadline, forcing rushed and incomplete resolutions. The opposition enters 2027 fragmented across at least two platforms, likely the ADC and a legally uncertain NDC, or Obi forced back into the ADC under pressure rather than genuine reconciliation. Tinubu enters the election facing a divided field similar in structure, though not in margin, to 2023. Worst case for Nigerian democracy. None of the legal disputes resolve cleanly, multiple parties enter the ballot with contested leadership claims, and the 2027 election is litigated as much in the courts after the vote as it was campaigned in public before it, repeating the post-election legal battles that have followed every Nigerian presidential election since 1999, but with even greater institutional confusion baked in from the start.
We opened with a question. Can Peter Obi and Atiku really stop Tinubu in 2027? After this analysis, the honest answer is, the numbers say yes, the structure says not yet, and the next 11 days, as the NDC's legal status and the July 11 INEC deadline collide, may determine which version of not yet Nigeria is actually looking at. The 15 million votes that opposed Tinubu in 2023 have not disappeared. What has been missing consistently since that election is the organizational discipline to convert mathematical advantage into political reality. Every coalition meeting, every court filing, every public insult between former allies is a missed opportunity to build the thing that actually wins elections, a unified, credible alternative that Nigerians can vote for without having to choose between three good options on three different platforms. Whether that opportunity gets seized before January 2027 or wasted for a second consecutive election cycle is no longer a question of arithmetic. It is a question of whether Nigeria's opposition leaders can subordinate personal ambition to a shared goal for longer than 14 months at a time. If this analysis gave you clarity on what is really happening with Nigeria's opposition, share it with one person who needs to see it. Like this video, subscribe to Pulse Nigeria HQ, and tell me in the comments, can this opposition actually come together, or is 2027 already decided? I will see you in the next one.